civil rights leader, black nationalist fighter. Every man was born of a woman. So who is this woman who gave birth to Malcolm? Louise later, a freedom fighter too. A famous Grenadian, she come from Digue. Louise Langdon later, must be remembered too.
What must we root out? What must we sever, right? And so again, going back to the guiding question, and some things were covered, and you're probably leaving without an answer, but that's the point of this. More reflection to lead you to an answer that works for your community. So like really disrupting the colonizer mindset, we have to interrogate, right? It might start with linguistic discrimination, that if our dialects are good enough for folk songs and good enough for soca and calypso, and it's good enough for our entertainers, it's good enough to show up in the text that our students read in class, then it's good enough for people to speak. And we have to understand that the concept of speaking proper, that is a colonial mindset. And we cannot chastise our kin because they sound differently from us. Ask yourself, why is that a matter of importance to chastise your kin? Once you realize where that behavior stems from, okay? And so again, I hope this information was quite helpful to you. This is my contact email. If you want to have this conversation further with me, you can contact me at readtechrights@gmail.com. I am happy to engage. I am happy to follow up. But I just hope that by walking through the markers of identity and understanding that decolonizing a culture, decolonizing starts with really interrogating the history of things, going back to the root of things in order to make change. Thank you.
Special thanks to Dr. Marshall Baker on that emphatic presentation on decolonizing our Caribbean culture, in particular how we can disrupt the linguistic discrimination so as to foster deeper cultural connections. One of our very own community member will share reflections on the presentations this evening. Ms. Nikisha Charles was born and bred in Digue as the last daughter of one of the village's stalwarts, teacher Bernadette Charles. Nikisha went to preschool with her mom at the Digue preschool and later moved to the Holy Innocents Anglican Primary School, where she excelled and attained top performer status in the exit common entrance examination. She attended and graduated from St. Joseph's Convent, Grenville, thereafter migrating to Brooklyn, New York, USA, also known as the Little Grenada. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from CUNY Brooklyn College and a master's degree in public health from the George Washington University, where she is currently pursuing an executive degree, earning her the title Doctor Public Health upon completion. She's passionate about anything Grenada and Grenadian, and is forever indebted to the people of Digue for their part played in her upbringing. Ms. Charles.
Thank you, Ms. Wells-Moras. Thank you to all the presenters who came before me for this wonderful opportunity to share. Very informative, very deep information. And my role here is to just provide some reflections on the material that was covered as it came across to me during the presentations. And this was a very broad range in terms of material covered. So I'm going to start with the presentation by Dr. Mohabir. And I took the information very well presented in segments of geography, activism, narrative, and learning. The geography context came out immediately, and I know Dr. Mohabir studies geography, and it was clear in her presentation. That context of Louise Langdon Little appealing to us and being sentimental to us because we're connected to her through Grenada, first of all, but through Digue mostly. So that was the first geographic context. And for Dr. Mohabir, it was Walter Rodney, her being, I guess, first generation Guyanese in Canada, and his role of activism in Guyana, has guided her work. And that geographic context again came through in the role of the international students during the university shut-ins and the fires prior. Their geographic context of being united in the same struggle, being international students in a foreign land, aided in their ability to effect, change eventually. And that led to the other idea of activism. And I thought of activism during this as, some people like Louise Langdon Little are born activists. She sought out activism. She traveled, again, geographically. She left Grenada and traveled to Montreal and became immediately involved in the efforts there with the UNIA and Marcus Garvey and the others. That was a calling for her that she thought as a woman she traveled overseas for. But for the students at the university in 1969, their activism was coincidental, because they came to learn and their learning was being affected by the policies, the systematic policies there. They were forced into activism, and that activism too was effective. So activism for some people is a calling, and for some people it's coincidental. And that's a lens that we were able to explore by Dr. Mohabir's presentation. Again, it came to narrative again, and the propagated narrative and the need to control the narrative and whose narrative is presented and whose narrative is accepted. The narrative of the media in Canada and the bureaucrats in Canada about what caused the fire was different from what the actual narrative of the students who were involved in the actual incident was. And the prevailing narrative at the time would have been that of the power, the ones who were in power. So the one who controls the messaging controls the outcome. When the students were able to therefore then after tell their side of the story many years later, then the university was forced to apologize. So again, controlling the narrative and how our history is told and played out is very important. That was very obvious by Dr. Mohabir's presentation. And again, the story of Mr. Fredericks was kind of a sad story about the coincidental activism, because his passion for learning was, sidestepped and not considered because of his place in society there. And, his relationship with his daughter, I'm sure, was affected, as she has said, because of his coincidental activism. But the wider message here is that true remediative change is often a process. It starts with one. It only takes a spark to get a fire going, and literally and figuratively. And once that spark is lit, then generations ahead will be able to benefit from these actions. So this was one of the main points that I got from Dr. Mohabir's presentation. Also, learning. So learning from the past is necessary to inform our future actions. And I like how she tied in the present situation with what's going on in Haiti and our own Grenadian experience of international intervention in times of crisis, and how that should inform us as members of the diaspora, as members of the Caribbean community, to inform those involved in making decisions about what happens going forward, and how we should use history, our own particular history, to inform what's going on in our own backyards. And that was a very apt way of wrapping up a presentation on geography and activism and narrative and context. So I found that presentation very well done and very informative, especially as we move on to establish Louise Langdon Little as a matriarch of civil rights, and as a matriarch of Digue, as a matriarch of Grenada, as a matriarch of activism. And we need to inform our discussions and our builds on processes like these. So Very well put together presentation, very informative. On to Dr. Barker. Very, 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 and another very informative presentation again. And again, her presentation came back to geography in context of culture and cultural identity. You know, I am one person in the United States. I'm probably a different person in Grenada. And that affects the way I view the world and the world views me. So her presentation of culture was through the lens of, I thought, community, communication, connection, and context. So community affects how I operate, where I am at the moment, the need to build a sense of community. I live in Brooklyn, and I always say, I'm so happy to live in Brooklyn because if I go to the Korean market, I'm most likely to find a Grenadian looking for a breadfruit at the same time that I am. And that's the sense of community that you get in looking. And you say, oh, long time I ain't see you. You find someone that makes you feel like home. So that's that sense of community that is being built in the diaspora. When I go to Texas, I have to travel to Walmart to get something. And I'm not likely to find someone who shares a commonality. You know, it's so refreshing to be in the supermarket and hear somebody speaking similarly to you. So that linguistic effect of culture and community is definitely a bonding experience. So that thought of community through the cultural lens was very important to me. Again, communication, how we speak to each other, how we speak about people. You know, I know my mom will tell me, oh, Malcolm X's mother is from by Cousin Olive. I know exactly who Cousin Olive is. I know exactly where it is. I don't know if it's true that's exactly where she's from, but that part of communication, that oral presentation of that piece of information to me from very young, led me to know that, you know, Digue is a seat of history. You know, a matriarch was born there. So that communicative piece of transmitting our history was very important too. Again, connection also. So I spoke of connection of hearing someone who speaks like me, you know, knowing that there's a commonality there and viewing our place in the world through that common context is very important. Dr. Barker spoke about decolonizing our culture and our identity, and important to decolonization as a verb. You know, decolonization should not be an adjective. It has to be a verb because it's an active activity. But we have to be knowledgeable of what we're doing. So we have to be interrogative of the process. We have to truly learn our history in context of how it happened at home. So we have to know our true history and not as it was presented. You know, previous history of Louise Langdon Little is of her as a footnote in history as, oh, the mother of Malcolm X was born in Grenada. You know, that's our context. She's the mother of Malcolm X, this civil rights beacon figure who happened to be born in Grenada. She wasn't an end to herself. Her story wasn't the end of a story. Her story was a means to an end of her son's story. And we need her story to be told as an end in and of itself. She has her own very vibrant, flavorful story, a story of migration as a woman, a story of migration as a woman, a story of migration to a non-English speaking part of Canada, to become a part of an activist movement in a time where women were persona non grata. Activism was, you know, a man's game at that time. And to interject yourself into activism knowingly as a woman, she had to have like a different kind of resilience. So I think in telling her story, we're starting the impetus to propagate our own history through our own lens. I think the panelists here today presented well and left us with thought-provoking questions to further inform the process of telling Louise Langdon's story, establishing her as a cultural entity and a cultural icon and a historical icon will pave the way for us telling our stories for future generations to come. But it starts with us knowing her story well and presenting it well to the audience that it needs to be presented with too. So thank you again for the opportunity to present these reflections on Louis, the material that was presented, and to be involved in the process of establishing Louise Langdon Little throughout the diaspora and in Grenada. So thank you again very much.
Thank you very much, Nikisha. Thank you for sharing those very, very well thought out, a very complete summary of what were, like you said, two wonderfully provocative presentations, very stimulating from Dr. Mohabir and from Dr. Lois Barker. I know we have questions. I know that after these two presentations, we must have questions, or else we're so complete, we're so replete with information that maybe we're all very satisfied. But I'm going to look here in the chat, and I see a question being asked, and this one is to you, Dr. Mohabir. I'm sorry, you all, she's my supervisor and I call her Nalini, so forgive me. To you, Nalini, were any of the students able to complete their education at Concordia? Somebody wants to know, or where did they go after? What kind of alternative career paths did they engage with? Or were they engaged in any other kinds of activisms? What do we know? What do we know about that?
Thank you. I believe that's from Marie Wells. Thank you very much for that question. Just before I answer it, I also just wanted to say thank you to Nikisha Charles for that incredible summary of both presentations that you did on the fly. That takes so much effort in terms of active listening and reflection, and being able to just pull that together with so much depth is just wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for also pulling out things that I didn't know was there. I am a geographer, and I didn't realize that there was a strong strand of geography. So thank you for that. In terms of the question, just to give you a sense that, you know, when I say that these students were the best and the brightest of the Caribbean, you know, so some of the other student leaders, names that you probably know, like Rosie Douglas, leader, you know, of Dominica, he obviously went on to be a head of state. Anne Cools, who was one of the women from Barbados who was arrested and also faced grave charges, went on to be a senator here in Canada. People like Rodney John finished up their education and got, were not able to follow through with their original plans, but he was able to, so he was one of the original complainants. He was able to get a PhD in psychology. So again, very impressive people. I'm just flipping through here because I have his name momentarily escapes me. Delisle Worrell, who again, you might be familiar with, former head of the Bank of Barbados. He went on to pursue, obviously, a very incredible and impressive career. Dennis Forsyth, who was involved in the protests, gave up on Canada, went back to Jamaica, became a lawyer, was involved in the campaign to legalize marijuana, and has written several books on Rastafari. In terms of the women, because we cannot forget the women, Brenda Dash, who was also faced serious jail time due to her activism, was born here in Montreal. She parents from the Caribbean. I want to say Trinidad, but I'm not 100% sure on that. She also left Canada, but then became involved in Black Power in the US. There's an amazing picture of her and Jesse Jackson at the Reverend Jesse Jackson at a Black Power conference in the US. Nancy Warner, another student, also left Canada, gave up on this place and moved to the US. So very trajectories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nalini. Thank you, Mary, for that question as well. I'm going to ask if there are any other questions earlier on, for example, and this is the provocateur in me, I guess. Earlier on, Nalini posed a question around the role that our history plays in our contemporary sort of disposition towards issues of regional importance as we face down another possibility of intervention in the internal affairs of one of our CARICOM member states. And I know, for example, that the Prime Minister of Canada met with CARICOM recently, as did the President of Ukraine, in a very unprecedented sort of meeting. So there are these historic, what I call reverberations in my work, continue to inform the present moment and continues to invite us to reflect upon, I think we got both sides today from Dr. Louise Barker on the fire that time, that time from Nalini, sorry, and then James Baldwin always invoking the fire next time, right? So we got some James Baldwin as well. And so how these histories continue to inform contemporary moments, kind of that circularity that informs our life in the Caribbean region, where we're constantly the focus of these interventions, I think is something for us to think about. And in the Grenadian context, in a moment where we're thinking about regionalism and the new government in St. George's, how do we take the call of regionalism further than lip service, I think is an important thing for us to think about. And I think we have wonderful examples in the students at Sir George, in the life of Louise Langdon, in the advocacy of her son Malcolm X. I think as we continue these conversations in community, we get a little bit closer to maybe not answers, but we move the needle just a little more in our understanding of what, as Lois told us, asked us what decolonization means and how action, what actions we're willing to take in the cause of decolonization. So as usual, I'm very happy to be part of these ongoing conversations in community. Somebody said in the chat, big up Rosie Douglas. Absolutely, big up to Rosie Douglas. And at this time, if there are no other questions, I'm going to invite Lindana to give us, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna, somebody is asking, is there any learning from these experiences to inform diaspora policy in the, I'm guessing in the Caribbean context? Yes, so there are a couple of questions popping up just right at the end. So yes, so I'm guessing, how do we invoke these historical activisms to think about diaspora in the current context where Caribbean governments are being asked to be in relation to their diaspora population in some very transactional ways? How do we think about that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with you, Tesfa. That was a great way to put it, transactional. So much of diaspora policy is informed by the by attracting investors, by remittances, and so on. But that's, I think, what the IPE is doing differently, is actually inviting a conversation to build bridges and to build knowledge collectively. And I would love to see that, as a way to build diaspora relations, to think about how we might bring our histories together and our geographies together to create something new.
Thank you for that. One of the questions that I ask in my research is, what do diasporas do best? And that question arises out of my own engagement with diaspora policy and understanding sort of the economic imperative that informs the way that we engage with our diasporas. Somebody asked, why do we allow ourselves to continue to be defined I guess, who are we? And that's a good question to, I believe, end on. At this time, again, thank you so much for being here, but there's an official vote of thanks, and I will invite Lindana to do that for us.
Thank you, Tesfa. Good night again, everyone. I just want to insert a quote here from Kellogg 2019, page 7, from Dr. Nalini's and Ronald Cummings' book, The Fire That Time. It says, "Our fire blazes with or without promises, official acknowledgements, titles, and honors. It does not require crowns or flags, medals of honor, uniforms, or other accoutrements. Fire is a force we have carried with us since our arrival on these shores, and which we continue to carry. We are powerful beyond measure. The power to effect change lies within us. The legacy of Louise Langdon Little, her son Malcolm X, the stands by the Black Caribbean students, and all those who have fought and accomplished some degree of transformation on our behalf will always be lauded. Their fire, their activism ignited and continue to fuel immeasurable possibilities for people of color. We therefore are charged to maintain and build on that legacy by fostering the environment for deeper connections with our language and our roots. Our uniqueness as a people, our individuality cannot be duplicated. Embracing all aspects of our culture through greater inclusiveness of our language in our daily interactions is no longer an option, but it's an absolute necessity. It is our hope that you were inspired by all that you have heard tonight and commit to doing your part to transform thinking and bring about change in your communities. Our actions define us. And so as we reflect on our past, we should aspire to build on what has gone before and forge a path that lends itself to shared understanding, unity, shared goals, and the laying of the foundation for progressive and connected communities. What we do today sets the tone for our continued legacy. At this juncture, we wish to give thanks. So we want to extend, first of all, a heartfelt thank you to Mr. Elwin McQuilton for your continued investment in driving initiatives like this and lending your incredible talent to promoting our legacy. We truly appreciate you. We wish to extend our sincerest appreciation to our guest speakers tonight. Very edifying presentations. Professor Dr. Nalini, your perspectives on nationalistic pride and the fight for recognition of our value and our worth as Black people and as Caribbean people compels us to continue to do our part to uplift and effect change in our own communities. Dr. Lois Marshall Barker, a people without an identity is forever lost. You have certainly given us food for thought about our role in the process of continuity of our language, which is an integral part and an integral aspect of who we are as Caribbean, as Black people. To Nikisha Charles, our daughter of the soil, we appreciate and value the significance of your involvement in lending your voice and action to this initiative. Your reflection, truly eloquent, and it really eloquently expressed the substance of the presentations here tonight. Sincere thank you to my co-host Tesfa and Marieve. Your commitment to the task set before you tonight demonstrates your passion for community development and enriched experiences as a people. We thank you. We acknowledge and extend sincere thank you to the organizers of this third annual Memorial Education Forum, and to Peter, our convener and motivator in this journey. We express a sincere thank you for your dedication and hard work invested in the execution of these education forums. To your invited guests, friends, families, scholars, educators in Grenada and the diaspora representing and promoting cultural awareness and our rich history as Grenadians and Caribbean people. Sincere and profound gratitude for joining us tonight. As we take a leave tonight, I wish you all a blessed evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good night, everyone.